Everybody does the Camino for a particular reason, and some are spiritual, some people do it for religious purposes, and some people do it purely for a physical challenge. A little, thrill seekers that might climb Mount Everest might think, oh, I'm going to do the Camino, that'd be kind of cool. And one of the takeaways of the Camino for me was there's no other place or experience in the world that you can meet somebody in this environment and have the depth of conversations. It's a waterfall of emotions, and the easiest thing that I can compare that to is it's 600 miles of a communal group therapy session, and the people in the therapy session change every hour or two. We as Americans, as a culture, don't listen. We talk over people. We really don't listen, and I think the compassion of most conversations that we have as a culture, being Americans, is we're not that interested in the other person we're listening to or we're talking to. But what I found was that only by giving do you truly receive.
This week, Scott Freeman is our guest, who takes us along his journey of the Camino de Santiago, also known as the Way of St. James. The trail is a 600-mile spiritual walk from the southwest corner of France to the endpoint of Santiago de Compostela in northwest Spain, where there's a shrine of the Apostle St. James. Scott provides American Real with an insider's view of his 30-day expedition and all that transpired along the way of this pilgrimage, which has existed since 812 AD. Scott provides tips about how to best prepare for this adventure. He shares stories about friends he made, incidents that occurred, and gives an up-close and personal view about how this walk transformed his mindset. Now, if you're looking for some inspiration to elevate your mindset, enroll in the American Real Live Tribe 21-Day Challenge through our free private Facebook group. Your challenge will be to post a live 60-second video each day for 21 straight days to build skills of confidence, commitment, leadership, and accountability, all while growing your network from people around the world. You'll quickly see how turning up each day gives you more clarity, purpose, and drive to become your best self. Our team is here to help support you and provide you with the tools you need to become more present and conscious of valuing the power of your own story. Click on the link below to join American Real Live Tribe 21 and start your 21-day challenge today. And now, without further ado, I bring to you Mr. Scott Freeman. This is American Real. I am Roger Brooks, and today our very special guest is Scott Freeman, businessman, musician, and you recently had an experience with the Camino walk, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Roger. Excited.
You've done a lot in your life. I just want to throw out a couple of things because I know of some of your past. You've climbed many mountains.
Many mountains.
Including Everest.
Not Everest.
Kilimanjaro
and pretty much every tall mountain in North America and in Europe, but Everest might be on my bucket list.
Okay, good.
Not there yet.
Okay. I know you spent a lot of your career in the financial services industry, and have been very successful at that. And you're a musician, and you have your own band. And one other thing that I found out, you were a photographer for Frank Sinatra.
I was, yeah.
So before we get into why we're here today, can you just touch on that? Because I think that's a really special thing. That
It's just really interesting, and I was 18 years old, and I happened to be at the right place at the right time. And I think a lot of us, our journey through life is not were we really smart, we were really good, did we work that hard? We're lucky, and we just happen to be at the right place at the right time. Right. My whole life, I think, I've been at the right place at the right time. I was 18. Sinatra was supposed to play a concert. It was snowed out. I happened to be at a nightclub, and it was a really crappy night with a couple of my friends, and there was this guy sitting alone at the bar, and I went up and just said, "Hi, I'm Scott Freeman," and had a nice conversation. He happened to be an advance man for Frank Sinatra.
Okay.
And then when he told me what he did, I said, "Oh, you're here in Vance," and then it all clicked. And then I just thought, boy, here's a great opportunity. So I just said, well, I'm a photographer, and I specialize in performing arts. I was 18 years old. I specialize in, whatever.
Right.
So make a long story short, Sinatra was rescheduled for a couple months after that. He remembered me. He reached out to me. He left a phone message and said, "I'm going to leave a pass for you at the box office. I'd like to see what you can do." So that started it. Wow. And from there, I went all over God's creation with Sinatra. There's a particular shot that I took of Sinatra back in 1978 that was on TV Guide, and I was smart enough to get royalties on it. To this day, I still get royalties. Not a lot, but that photo has paid little dividends for years and years. It just happened to be being at the right place at the right time, and that opened up some other doors. And my love of music goes back to the big band in Sinatra. And who would think 30-some years later, I'd be in a band, a horn band, and I'd be doing a lot of Sinatra's music.
That's
so
neat. What a great
really,
story.
Yeah.
Where were you when you met that advance man? What city?
It was in Binghamton, New York.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
It was a place called the Courtyard.
Okay. All right.
So.
And how long did you do that for? Was it a couple of years or?
It was probably 10 years. And I've got all sorts of stories about Sinatra and the performing arts industry. We can save that for another time. But it was but what I did understand at a very young age is I knew my place. And I was in situations where there was a lot of celebrities, and I could have been awestruck with a lot of stars that I met. My place was I was just there to document. And somebody might snap their fingers and say, "Scotty, come over here and take this picture." Okay, I took the picture.
Got it.
And it was probably in my late 20s. I was doing that from age 18 to probably late 20s or so.
That's very special.
Yeah.
Very special. Neat. So look, we're here today to talk about your Camino walk. And I heard about this maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Have never talked to anyone like this about it specifically. So tell us what the Camino walk is, and tell us how you came upon this journey.
Now, how many hours do we have? And I've told this story countless amounts of times. Radio, TV audiences of this, because it's a life-changing experience, and it's not something that you can just use one adjective to describe. Oh, it was unbelievable. It was awesome. It was life-changing. You blend all these adjectives into an experience that is just so incredible. And what makes this interesting, it's really twofold, because some people do this for purely religious reasons. There's a faith-based connection with the Camino going back to biblical times. The apostle to Jesus, St. James, was murdered, beheaded in Israel, in the Holy Lands. They brought his body back, minus the head, I guess, or the head severed, by boat, and ended up in Santiago de Compostela, which is in northern Spain. And they buried his remains there. And over the centuries after that, they started building a mosque, mausoleum, something like that. Today it's this huge, gigantic cathedral. And a lot of people believe that even though St. James didn't walk the Camino, there's healing powers of doing this walk. There's visions that you see. There's special things that happen along the Camino as a result of that. And the only way you can truly embrace that and understand it and get the full benefit of that is by walking that 600 miles. So people from all over the world come to walk this hallowed ground in this, this dirt that ends up in this unbelievable, beautiful cathedral. And there's a church service at the end. And it was one of the most moving experiences I've ever seen.
So where do you start? Okay, so first of all, let's get back, let's go pre-walk. And now, why are you even thinking of doing this? What made you think of wanting to do this? And then what made you say, okay, I'm going to actually do
That's
it?
the $10,000 question. So, and everybody does the Camino for a particular reason. And some are spiritual, a connection with the universe, a connection with godliness. Some people do it for religious purposes because of the spiritual connection to St. James, and there's cathedrals and places of worship all along, predominantly Catholic, all along that way. And some people do it purely for a physical challenge. A little, thrill seekers that might climb Mount Everest might think, oh, I'm going to do the Camino. That'd be kind of cool.
Right.
But most people do it to find purpose, to find answers to lifelong problems, to find the secret to happiness. An opportunity to be outside of your normal lives in the rat race and just walk every single day. And sometimes you walk in the woods, sometimes you're walking in big cities, sometimes you're walking across countryside in dirt, in mud, in rain, in snow, up hills, down hills. But it's the same path that 250 to 300,000 people from all over the world walk every single year.
Fascinating.
So it's amazing.
And why did you do it?
Well, that's a funny story. So I had not had great luck with relationships my entire life and gone through a couple of divorces, and I just thought, maybe it's me. And the only way I'm truly going to find out is if I really take some time to dissect what makes me me, and maybe the relationships that I've had in the past needed work, or I needed work, or I needed to be able to see things from a different angle. And what a better way to go is just deconnect, not be on social media and cell phones and that, and just walk with a backpack on and try to get clarity. And that was really the reason that I went, of just, well, is there something wrong with me? And if I just picked the wrong women. So that was my intention of going there, to find deeper meaning of that.
I see. So you get there, you obviously, day one starts, and tell us what you're feeling. How does day one go for you?
It's not like getting off the bus at band camp where there's somebody with a clipboard and a whistle. and I tell this people, oh, well, it's a tour, right? No, it's not a tour.
You're on your own.
You're on your own. But people are coming and going all the time, and people that do this walk are referred to as pilgrims. And so the first thing you do along the way is, and I started in southern France in a little town called Saint-Jean, and you have to go to the pilgrim office, and you get a passport, and I can show that later. But you get the passport, and then along the way, every place you eat or stay, you get a stamp.
Okay.
And then at the end, they'll look at that, and then, does that show that you've actually walked the entire 580 kilometers or whatever that exact amount was? And then you get a certificate for that, showing you've completed the Camino. But it all starts in southern France, and you can start on a particular day, morning, noon, night. You can go with a group, by yourself. But the first day is the most difficult and very, very dangerous, because that is the day that you cross over the Pyrenees. So in southern France, you cross over the Pyrenees and end up in Spain. And the first little town on the Spanish side is called Roncesvalles. And that's really where the Camino begins, going across northern Spain.
I see. So did you start in the morning, or what time of day did you start?
First thing in the morning, and there's a funny story about that, because, they show up at the pilgrim office, didn't know a soul. And when we got off the train, you don't know if they're just tourists or people actually doing the Camino. So everybody's standing, there's probably 10 or 15 people that I didn't know were standing outside the pilgrim office, just all looking, not knowing anything. And there's some volunteers in there that, explain, well, come on in, this is how this works. You fill this out, and this is how it works. And one of the first questions of one of the volunteers was, do you know this is very dangerous? And then everybody kind of looks around and go, wonder, where's he going with this? Well, the weather this time of year, because I started in March, and the weather this time of year crossing the Pyrenees is very, very dangerous. And you know, 2 people died yesterday crossing over the Pyrenees.
Wow.
And then suddenly it was this, look of just the color washed out of people's faces. And then they said, are you going alone or are you going in groups? And then I raised my hand and I said, well, I don't want to be the brash guy from New York because I just wanted to be here by myself and just kind of, yeah. But does anybody have any experience in wilderness medicine? No. Does anybody have any experience in Arctic conditions? No. Is anybody really prepared for bad weather? No.
Wow.
So that's how it all started. And then what I said, okay, can I make a suggestion? I've got experience in all these categories. There's benefits to us 12 people staying together. And let's at least stay together as a groups, and then if anybody gets into trouble, we've got groups, and I can be there in case anybody slips or falls, or, and I've got a full medical kit with me that I can take care of almost anything. And so that's what we did. So the next morning, we started at 8 in the morning.
I see.
And that's where it began.
So how long did you stay with that initial 12?
Well, what's really interesting, because the Camino is, you figure 600 miles and it's a roving community.
Yeah.
And, people go at this pace, that pace. They might want to see some historical things. They might want to worship in a place, a church that they heard about, or some connection, or just, spend some extra time there. So very few people that you meet in the beginning of the Camino you see, or you may run into along the way. Mm-hmm. There was 10 people out of that 12 that we all started with. 10 of those ended the same day.
No kidding.
We stayed together the entire time.
Wow.
And these are individuals that I'm still in contact with on a weekly basis, usually through social media, Facebook or WhatsApp. And we will be friends for life. And some of us will see each other, some of us will never see each other again, but there's a bond that we have and kind of a membership of a fraternity that words can't even explain what that is. Yeah. What that experience really is transformational.
That's incredible. So, okay, so now you get through day one, you go over the mountains, and I'm interested in what you started talking about, the purpose that you went for. What happened along the way internally? Did you start to get clarity? Did you start to look internal? What were some of the feelings that you were experiencing at the time?
It's a waterfall of emotions, and the easiest thing that I can compare that to is it's 600 miles of a communal group therapy session, and the people in the therapy session change every hour or two. Because even though the 10 of us were together the entire time, it didn't mean that for 8 or 10 hours a day we were walking and talking. You meet people all the way along the Camino. And I might meet somebody from Israel, and then suddenly we get into a conversation. And one of the takeaways of the Camino for me was there's no other place or experience in the world that you can meet somebody in this environment and have the depth of conversations immediately. In life today, you would say, well, hi, Scott, how are you? And I would say, good, how are you? On the Camino, you would walk up to somebody and say, hi, how are you? I'm not doing so well today. Okay, would you like to talk about it? Yeah. And then suddenly that opens up. So the conversations that people have along the way in the Camino are unlike anything else you'd see in society, because people are there to truly listen to people. We as Americans, as a culture, don't listen. We wait to we wait to talk. We talk over people. We really don't listen. And I think the compassion of most conversations that we have as a culture, being Americans, is we're not that interested in the other person we're listening to or we're talking to. Mm-hmm. The Camino, which is just so unbelievable, is you meet total strangers and have a depth of a conversation like you've known this person your entire life. I can tell you people I've known my entire life, I've never had a conversation even remotely close to the conversations I had there. This goes on every day. This goes on every hour, every minute. And just with total strangers, you have these deep, deep conversations. And there's a healing component of that you just feel set free, that you don't have to be put in a particular box. You don't have to act a certain way. You don't have to have people's perception worrying about that. So all the psychological baloney that you've got built that we all have, and I refer to that as people that don't go to therapy and people that don't deal with their issues, they're carrying around a little red wagon. And the little red wagon is full of boulders. Along the Camino, you get rid of those boulders. And so you know, if you think in terms of metaphorically or image there, you think of, you know, you start the Camino with this red wagon full of a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And along the way, you start jettisoning boulders, and as you get further along the way, there's only little tiny rocks in there. And by the time you end up in that beautiful cathedral where St. James was buried, your red wagon is free. Your soul is free. The baggage that you may have been carrying around your entire lifetime is gone.
Wow. That's deep. That's deep. And have you been able to, one of the things I like to talk about here on American Real, and it's the whole reason we're doing this, is to help with transparency, to really get to the real essence of a person, to have a real conversation as we're doing right now. Have you been able to take the lessons that you learned from that walk, that 600-mile walk, and apply them to your life since you've been back?
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the huge takeaways. And you know, when I went there, you know, your first question was, well, why did you go and do the Camino? And I went for one thing, one reason, which was somewhat narcissistic and somewhat, you know, all about me. But in reality, what I learned and my takeaway from the Camino was totally different. Finding the woman of my dreams was no longer, as I was going along the Camino, that was just surface, you know, kind of baloney. That was a story inside of my head. Okay, out of the millions of women in the world, I picked two. Nice women, there just weren't the ones that were compatible for me. So you think, was there something wrong? No, there wasn't something wrong. And that's one thing that I realized, and then I just let it go. But what I found was that only by giving do you truly receive. And I spent the majority of my Camino doing three things. Number one was, I'm a paramedic with a lot of experience in dealing with foot problems in hiking and wilderness and frostbite and everything else and blisters. And after the first couple of days or so, people knew who I was. And the first couple of days are the worst thing for feet because you get blisters. Then there's a technique that you use where you take a needle and thread, and you go through the blister itself. And then you tie off that little piece of thread, and then that blister drains and is allowed to drain and heals. The dead skin doesn't fall off for weeks at a time. So you don't have that skin that pulls off and that raw, you know, dermis underneath that, which is extremely painful. So what was I doing? In some cases, I was in coffee shops, I was in churches, I was in the side of the road, putting needles in thread through people's blisters on my hands and knees. And it was almost like Jesus washing people's feet. So the symbolism of that, and I never really even thought about that, but I was taking care of people's feet. And I was allowing them to experience that and reducing the pain that they'd be doing. So my Camino was really, truly about giving in a way that I never gave before. And then I had a blog that I wrote, and you know, you do have Wi-Fi at night, and you'd stay at little places called albergues, which is like a hostel, bunks, communal showers, you know, no privacy. And so this blog that I wrote, just kind of letting my family and friends back home know that I was safe and a little bit about that. And then on Facebook, I'd post a couple pictures and a couple little, but the blog I actually wrote. And you know, it started out, and on WordPress, you can actually see where the people that are actually viewing your blog come from. So what started out as some people from, you know, upstate New York, ended up, I think it was about 1,700 people a day from all over the world. So that just like you're experiencing with the American Real, the reach in the expansiveness of digital media today is unbelievable. So, you know, as the readership started to grow, I felt, wow, there's people that are actually interesting and hear about this. And I was writing heartfelt information about what I was truly experiencing, and then pictures every day. And one of the problems with that is you know, the bandwidth in these little places is not great. And what I ended up having to do was I would be going around to everybody's bunk, taking care of their feet, bandaging them for the next day. Maybe 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, I was done. that's when I would write my blog because everybody was asleep and I had enough bandwidth to upload the pictures. To me, that was my mission every day because I knew there was people out there in the message that I was sending of the experience that particular day, or the people that I had met, or the heartfelt conversations that I had with a total stranger. That's really, really good stuff. And so you can sort of see that you're walking 25 to 35 miles a day with a backpack. My backpack's over here. And burning an awful lot of calories, and you need your sleep. And I'm a guy that typically needs 7 to 8 hours of sleep every day. I was averaging 2 or 3 hours of sleep because I felt so compelled that I needed to share this story while I was out there. And in real time almost, I had to do that. My mission was giving to an extent that I never even thought was human possible out of me. I think maybe I was more of a taker in society. I gave a lot, but I think it was more about what do I get out of this if I'm going to do this. And now I just openly give, and only by giving you get 10,000 times back by just living in a world and a life where you give, and your whole purpose is to give and to help people and shed a little happiness everywhere you go. And that's just one of the huge takeaways of the Camino for me.
Wow, it's powerful, Scott. And look, I think the reality is, and I've been on this path myself for several years now of the giving path, but there's a lot of people out there that have not started yet. And you could talk about it firsthand. How does it change your life when you start to give? How does it affect the essence of who you are, from our ego standpoint down to the standpoint of, how does it change your life when you begin to give?
I think we probably need a couple psychologists to help us dissect that, but let me take a stab at that because I'm probably not qualified enough to give you the clinical reason behind that. But we all, and I've spent a lot of time doing psychology and understanding this that led me to do the Camino, that led me to get where I am today. But we all have issues from childhood. That's why therapists keep growing, and it's a wonderful profession because people don't deal with that. And as a culture here in the United States, we don't communicate as well as we probably should. I think we're doing better, and I think it's open, and therapy is no longer a bad word. But when you have a lot of stuff here that prevents you from being happy, I'm not sure that you are allowed or allow yourself the opportunity to put yourself out there to give. There's the defense mechanisms, there's the walls, there's all those other sort of psychological things that prevent that. But this is my own take in doing the Camino on this, is that, and I'm not sure, and I'm a happy guy, and I think I was a happy guy, and most people that would know me have always said I'm a happy guy, and I smile a lot and laugh in that. But I'm not sure I was happy in here, and I think that's the distinction, that doing this and then allowing yourself to free yourself from all those boulders that you've been pulling around your entire life, and then give, and then be allowed to give, and to present yourself to the world in a way that you really, this is me, I might not be perfect, or I might not have the perfect body or the perfect teeth or the perfect hair, but that's not important, because along the Camino, what do? You spend a month or 2 months with a backpack. That's your entire world is in that little sack right there. So the significance of what's really important in life is the interpersonal communication, is the interactions that you have with people, in the way that you can impact somebody's life just by listening. And one of the funny things for me, and it's kind of the reverse of my intention of going, I met a lot of women along the way on the Camino. And I got the nickname, the doctor. And I think it was because I was taking care of people's feet, but I was also listening in a different way, and even taking the conversations deeper, because a lot of the women that go there, it's relationship based. And there's a lot of people from Europe, and they would not do the whole Camino all at once, but they might take a week off and do different sections of it. But just a respite from life. And I can't tell you the number of women that I that I met in the course of conversation, well, how is your life? And well, I hate my husband. My kids hate me. I'm miserable, blah, 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 blah. And then what I would find myself is just talking, and I say, well, you're saying this thing about your husband. Why do you feel that way about him? Tell me about your husband. I'd never done that before. Mm-hmm. But what I found was really being interested, and then I was able to share some of my pitfalls and some of the silly mistakes that I'd made in relationships, but now I'm seeing that's not so bad. And then I would actually be defending their husband, saying, well, he doesn't sound that bad. He's actually a nice guy. You married him for a reason. In the impact that I was having in maybe an hour walk through the woods somewhere with somebody that I'd never met was really impactful, and I had to run into him, countless other times and say, boy, I really appreciated that conversation. I really enjoyed your perspective on that. That you can't buy experiences like that. Right. It's just so rich and fulfilling, and
that wasn't something you really even expected going into it. That would have taken place.
That wasn't even the intention.
Yeah.
And that's where when we were off camera, I was just saying that there are so many takeaways on the Camino, but the reason that everybody does the Camino for a particular reason, but what they come back with sometimes isn't even remotely close, but it's 10 times greater.
Right.
And that's just this magical thing that happens along that hallowed ground.
So as you're going through, say now you're a week or so in, you're probably in a rhythm and in a pattern, and you're getting comfortable with this 30-day walk. Are there any peaks and valleys? Are there days where you're wondering, why am I here? Are you ever depressed, or is it a pretty steady plateau of emotion, or is that all over the board?
I would say it's all over the board. I didn't even think about this, but when I left, my kids gave me 4 or 5 different envelopes, and on the outside of one, if you're feeling lonely, read this. If you hurt really bad, read this.
Wow.
If you're missing home, read this. If you're depressed, read this. And my kids wrote something in each one of those about supporting me, how proud they were that I was doing this. And there was times that, and I don't want to get too graphic in this, but I've had 2 toe surgeries. And the toe in my right foot has been fused, so it doesn't move. Now imagine 30 miles a day going like this. The friction. Normal feet go like this. So guess what? The skin on my big toe literally was ground off. Wow. I had never experienced so much pain. And here I was taking care of everybody else's pain, and yet I wasn't even, after about a week, I wasn't even sure I could finish it. I was walking where my big toe would be off the ground just so there wasn't the friction. And then along the way, I would stop at drugstores and I got some foam, and I was coming up with kind of home remedies to be able to deal with that. But the pain that I was experiencing was unbelievable. But then I compared and contrast that to Jesus, and I thought, what about Jesus, and what about the pain that he carried for all of our sins? And I wasn't necessarily comparing myself to Jesus because my foot hurt.
Right.
But, pain.
Things in perspective.
And maybe there was a reason why I was supposed to feel this pain. And maybe there was, and all the way along, I felt pain, and it hurt. And, I'm Monday I'll be 60 years old. So, our bodies age, our joints get tired. So there is pain in there, but the pain is I think it was good pain. So, but I think the messages that my kids left me in my backpack, that was inspirational in a way that I can't even describe. And just knowing that they were there rooting for me, cheering me on, all that, I couldn't not. It's like you're running a marathon and you've got your family that traveled halfway around the country to be there to watch you finish. You're not going to finish. So that was my experience.
How did you deal with some of the deep emotion along the way? Did you take time for pause? Did you meditate? did you go to a different place than you've gone before? Because it's not easy sometimes to do those things, day to day when we're so caught up in our busy lives. So did you have time to do that?
Oh, certainly. Every day is different too. That's the other thing. And there's an unwritten rule on the Camino that you don't even have to explain to people, but you just get that. Sometimes you just want to walk alone. And when you want to be alone, you just walk alone. And it's okay to say, I really don't want to talk right now. And if you come by a stranger that was walking and you start walking with them, is it okay if I walk with you for a minute? You would always ask that. And then somebody might say, I'd rather just be alone. I'm in my alone time right now. So out of the course of, you start at 7 o'clock in the morning and usually you're done somewhere between 5 and 7, depending on what the route was that particular day. But there's always time in that stretch where you're alone. And that's part of the therapeutic beauty of the Camino. And then, you stop at a coffee shop and then the people that you might have started off with are there. Or you meet some other people and everybody's happy. And there's one anecdotal experience that I wanted to share that we were coming down about halfway through, and the weather when we did it was miserable. It was 30 to 35 degrees every day, snow, rain. It was just miserable.
Wow.
We saw the sun once, and I think I had a T-shirt on one
Out of the
afternoon.
entire month?
Out of the entire month, yeah, March to April. And you think about the weather in the Northeast United States. Okay,
Yeah.
March to April, you can kind of get the same thing. But I remember there was one point in time that there was the guy from Austria that was on our kind of group of 10, and we were in the pouring rain, damp. I don't want to say miserable. That's how I would have described it before. But damp, cold, tired, all of that. And then we were just sitting there in a field, and there was the path that went around, but the trail that we were on was just mud, and the water was running. So we stopped. We sat on our packs. And Kit Kats are very, very popular. And so we just sat there having a Kit Kat, and he had a little flask that he had with some kind of Australian or Austrian liquor in there and it was called Zoko, I think is what it was called. And I said, you want some Zoko and a Kit Kat? We'll like a Kit Kat. So we just sat there, and there we were, and we were just humming and singing. The rain was pouring on our face. We're just, and we were laughing and just singing, and we're happy.
Wow.
And that's the thing where you take, when you're truly happy, you don't need a sunny day to be happy.
Right.
You don't need to be on vacation to be happy. You don't need to have your family and friends and your rah-rah network around you to be happy. Happiness comes in a very different way. And that's another one of the takeaways of the Camino is when you truly are happy and your world is basically on your shoulders, and you just walk, and you don't have a care in the world, and that's really where true happiness comes from. So I think that's just an incredible experience. Again, just one of those little tidbits along the Camino, that suffering is part of it, pain is part of it, the physical challenge of it, being away from home, being away from your family, being away from your job and all that. But all those other little things just start to pale in comparison, and it opens up that veil of psychobabble that prevents us from finding happiness. When that veil is lifted, and then you're truly a happy being as a result of that, all these other things really don't matter.
Wow. Would you say that you've been able to gain some long-term benefits of those lessons of happiness, or are they short-lived?
Well, there was 3 takeaways, and I have these conversations with people because people are fascinated. Wherever I go, they hear that I did the Camino, or somebody else that knows me, he did the Camino.
Right.
And then, suddenly a group of people go, oh, you did the Camino. And
Right.
people want to hear about it. And more people are hearing about it. So, I say 3 things that really my 3 takeaways from the Camino. Number 1 was, if you're not interested in somebody and really don't care, don't ask them how they are. If you're going to ask somebody and say, how are you, truly be interested if they're having a bad day and you want to listen to why they're having a bad day.
Right.
And you want to maybe give them a pat on the back or make their day a little bit better. Mm-hmm. And only by giving do you receive. That's number 2. And a lot of us as Americans, we probably take more and take care of ourselves more than we truly give. So only by giving do you truly receive. And then the third takeaway that I had is every day I try to find some way that I can do something nice for somebody. Just to go out of the way of do something nice, something special. And it doesn't have to be monetary. You know, I mean, we hear random acts of kindness. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of a cliched way of doing that. But, you know, my view of that is to live a life where you're kind to people. And you help people, and you know, somebody having a bad day, or somebody stopped, did their car break down by the side of the road. Anything that you just run into over the course of the day, do something nice for somebody. And you think that if that other person that you did something nice for thinks, oh, I'm going to do something nice for somebody else, and I'm going to do something. Forward. Yeah. So
you've been able to apply some of this to your everyday life. That's wonderful.
I mean, and those are three things you just think about. How simple are those?
Right.
Well, I had to walk 600 miles to figure that out.
Sure. But you know what? Sometimes that's what it takes. You know, that wake up call. But you were also willing to put yourself through that. You know, and I commend you for that. That's something. First of all, not everyone has the opportunity to do it.
Right.
But you made the time. You invested in yourself, and now it sounds like it's paying dividends to you as an individual and others around you.
Oh, there's personal growth, there's spiritual growth, there's just so much growth all the way around as a result of that. But you think of a world, and you know, your impact of doing American Real, the impact on this across the universe and across the world can have huge impact. You know, but you think of, what if everybody did the Camino? And they walk away thinking that way. What if we had a world where every day we walk the Camino? And we as humans live a life where it's something special, and we all look towards being as happy as we possibly can, or shed as much happiness on the rest of the world as we possibly can.
Right. No, it's a ripple effect, and I think between what you do and millions of others that are doing that Camino walk, you know, what we try to do here at American Real, these are the type of, you know, platforms that help guide us to condition us to doing this every day. So we lead by example, you know, and
transformational technology.
That's right.
Changing people's lives.
Yeah. So tell us what it's like to, in your backpacks over there. This is your world for a full month. You know, we all live, you know, and I've been trying myself, you know, really hard to try to, you know, minimize the need for material. You know, we have way too much material in our lives. What's it like having your entire life in a backpack for 30 days?
Well, there's a plethora of information prior to going on the Camino, because everybody's an expert that does the Camino. So they want to tell people, and sharing is part of that. So, you know, on the internet, there's all sorts of different places that you can look in terms of what do you need for the Camino. And there's bulletin boards and, you know, different social media sites that you can look in there. And when you're planning for the Camino, it's pretty intimidating, because you're thinking, oh, well, I'm not staying in hotels. And, you know, things like, there's not towels in these places that you stay. So you have to take a towel, and you have to take a washcloth. And if you have dirty clothes, you have to wash them. And you don't want to have to wash a lot, and when it's on your back, you have to carry it every day. So you get this down to where, you know, a couple socks, a couple pairs of underwear, you know, one pair of slacks, one pair of shorts, you know, rain gear, a couple other layers, first aid kit, water, you know, snacks and toiletries.
All the necessities.
Just the bare necessities. And then you think, oh God, how am I going to do that? I need to take sandals, and I need to take a pair of sneakers, and I need to take boots, and I need, you know, and women, they need to stuff, you know, 5 purses and 16 pairs of shoes in a backpack. Well, where do they put anything else?
Right.
And even for guys, it's pretty intimidating when you think, you know, when we go on vacation, would we take a backpack just on vacation? No, we'd have to take all this other stuff.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's a great exercise for everybody to go through of just, you know, kind of getting rid of the clutter in life and a lot of the material things that you really don't need, and when you go to the store, do you really need, how many sweaters do you need? How many shoes do you need? So I think in terms of the way that I live, I have a lot less stuff than I ever had. You know, I've moved a couple times, so that's a great way to get rid of stuff. But, you know, I think, you know, our society, and, you know, there's statistics around in terms of the per capita square feet of retailing space we have in the United States versus everywhere else in the world. It's 7 times greater than almost everywhere else in the world. Yeah. And part of the problems that we're seeing with the Bon-Tons and Macy's and Toys R Us and that they had huge footprints of brick and mortar, and we really don't need the retailing space. And certainly online shopping is dramatically changed how that experience works. But I think possibly as a culture, Americans are realizing that they don't need that shopping experience, and you impulse shop when you're buying online. And I think people are inclined to buy a lot less online, impulse-wise. It's more, I need a pair of shoes, I'm going to Zappos, or you know, I'm going to a particular portal and I'm buying shoes.
Right. Versus going to the mall and grabbing things just
and grabbing, oh, I need one of those, I need those. So I look at that change in that dramatical transformation that we're seeing in retailing really is, I think, filtering down to the way that we consume goods in you know, in American society today, which, you know, kind of goes, you know, if you can live in your backpack for an entire week, how many shirts, how many sweaters, how many baseball caps do you need? Right. How many sneakers do you need? How many cars do you need? So those are the questions that, you know, when you're preparing for the Camino, you start thinking about that. And then along the way, well, you've got to wash a pair of underwear, you know, every day or two. And then before you go to bed, you wash it out into the sink and you rinse it out and you hang it up on a clothespin over your bunk. Yep. And you know, and then a towel, well, you don't want a thick towel that you might like back in society. You have a swimmer's towel that you wring out and it gets rid of, and then you might have it hanging off your backpack and dries, and then you put it in your backpack, and, you know, the next day when the shower, that's what you do. Sure. So it's all these things that just a minimalist experience and a minimalist society along the Camino of that it's really about happiness, and it's about communication, and it's about the experience of learning more about life, learning more about others, listening to people in a way that maybe we never did before. So those are the pillars of what the Camino is predicated on.
So take us to the path, and you're walking on this hallowed ground that so many millions have done over the centuries. Put that in perspective for us.
There's times when you're walking through cities with traffic, noise, you're tired, you're smelling diesel. That's not that great of an experience. But I want to juxtapose all these different experiences along the Camino. So that's an extreme where you're really not connected, you're just walking. You could be walking through any city in the world, practically. But then there's those little villages that you're kind of snaking through vineyards, and there's a lot of sheep in Spain. So you see a lot of shepherds out there walking their flocks and this and that, and you're in dirt. And you think about it while you're walking, I'm walking in this dirt that millions and millions and millions of people have walked going back thousands of years. This same dirt I'm walking on. And then you think of people that have faced medical situations there that were looking for some divine intervention while walking of that. And just the inspiration that comes out of doing that and the creative thinking and of that. You can feel the vibrations in certain cases. You don't in a city street. That's why I'm making this comparison. Sure. That you've got to think there's specific places. And I showed you off camera the one picture that somebody had taken me where I was just walking in the woods alone. And you can't explain what that feeling is like. And it's not like you're being superstitious or there's, you know, some kind of crazy spirits out there, but there are, whether it's vibrations, whether you're so hyper-focused to being open to the universe in a way that you never have before, that you're feeling things in your feet and you're feeling things in your whole body that are life-changing. Wow. And, you know, you can't, unless you do this, you can't really experience, and words don't even do it justice. Mm-hmm.
Was there a moment in those 30 days that stands out to you as being a pillar moment,
or did each day just kind of build upon each other?
Twofold. There was two things that I'll highlight. Every day there was highlights, and it's tough to do, but two that really stand out are there was one. It's kind of a highlight of the Camino because it's just about the midway point, and it's called Cruz de Ferro. And what this is, part of the tradition of the Camino is everybody brings a rock from home. And I don't know if you've ever heard the story before, but the rock signifies all your sins, misdeeds, and things that you regretted doing. New Year's Eve, sometimes you have those things you throw into a bonfire to,
Right.
regrets.
Right.
Yeah. So in my particular case, I had a boulder this big in my backpack, figuratively.
Right.
In reality, it was a little stone there. But everybody that does the Camino, when they hit Cruz de Ferro, and there's a very large totem pole at the top of this mound of rocks, and there's Himalayan prayer flags similar to Mount Everest that adorn that, and millions of rocks in this. And the 10 people that we were, the same 10 pretty much, that we were with that day, we were the only ones there. And again, it was early morning, and it was another crappy day, and it was cloudy, and it was drizzling. But we just said, one of the beauties of this is that we can each independently go up there, and you walk up this kind of mound of rocks, and whether you want to pray, whether you want to, whatever you want to do, you have your time. And this is when I did it in March, April, it's a quiet time. It's kind of off season. But the people that I've talked to that did it in prime time, there's 300 people on Cruz de Ferro. So the experience that we had there was unbelievable in that each one of us got to spend a couple of minutes just there on our knees, whether it was bowing, praying, doing whatever, inspiration, that, and having that moment, that special moment on this when you're standing on top of millions of rocks that really represent everybody's regrets and misdeeds, along with your own. You take that out and symbolically, you've carried this thing for 300 miles already, and now you're taking it out, and does that really set yourself free? Does that get your load of rocks out of your little red wagon, so to speak? Mm-hmm. And so everybody in our group, all 10, and I'll tell you, there was one gentleman that was from Israel who's an atheist. And I remember I met him the first day, and I just said, well, why are you doing the Camino? And he goes, well, I'm not doing it for religious reasons. And I said, oh, really? And he goes, well, the problem is that if there really is a God, I don't think he's doing a really good job. And I said, okay. And the classic line would be, well, thank you for sharing. And I thought, okay. And he was solely doing the Camino for the physical endurance, and the gentleman's 70 years old or so, and he just wanted the physical challenge of doing it. And he's in one of those three buckets, it's spiritual, religious, or the physical challenge of it. But to see this man along the way changed dramatically, and I'm not saying that he became a believer in God and found religion, but he became a much nicer person. And I think Cruz de Ferro was the midpoint on that. And he was up there, and you could really understand, even though you couldn't hear him in that, but you could read his body language and seeing something magical was happening to this man. And I wouldn't say he was all that happy, and may not have been as nice of a man as he is today. And he and I are still friends.
Interesting.
And just amazing. So, quick ending to that story was everybody was done. We walked down the mound of rocks. We walked across the street. There was a picket fence. And so we all leaned up, and we were all just kind of buzzing from the experience of that whole thing. And then the guy from Austria that had his little hip flask, he said, well, I think we should all have a drink. So we passed the whole thing. And thank God I didn't get any germs, because there's a lot of germs shared,
Sure.
and just drinking out of the same bottle, living so close to each other, no private space in that. And then the most incredible thing happened. We're sitting there, we all have a little sip of this thing. And this was this crappy day, low clouds, drippy. The sky opened up. The sun came out. And we're sitting there going, oh my God. and everybody was just speechless that we had this unbelievable experience where symbolically we've cleansed ourselves. We're clean, and our world is friction free and free of all this junk, and the sun comes out. Wow. And if you didn't believe in a higher power before that, and then you go through this experience, you have to believe. And then we just said, well, might as well get back, put on our backpacks. 2 minutes later, guess what? Clouds closed up.
That's remarkable.
Started raining again.
Remarkable.
So, yeah, that was, you can't make this stuff up.
Wow. Any moments that affected you where maybe you had a tough time, difficult time, that you could reflect back now and say, wow, I got through that? And I know you mentioned the letters from your kids, but was there any moment that stands out where it was difficult?
I think the most difficult was the pain that I had with my foot early on, and wondering if was that going to prevent me from continuing. And there was epiphanies that I had, that some things in my life that made sense, and you can kind of connect the dots. But I felt that was all in good. You kind of uncover. You could go to therapy for 5 years. Sure. And not uncover what you could uncover there just by being away from everything and free from the shackles of society. So there was a lot of little things along the way for me that made the difference. But just living a life of giving was probably the biggest takeaway that I had. That going there with the idea of all about me, I've got to find the I, and my whole experience was just giving, as much as I possibly could, and not getting enough sleep, but writing the blog and knowing I could touch people, and every day the viewership from all over the world was increasing. And a funny aside from that would be, you see what countries on WordPress these are coming from.
Right.
So, we had people from all over the world in our group. And so, Germany had 336. Oh, Robbie, do you know 336 people in Germany that read it? No, I didn't. Or New Zealand or Vietnam, they're on the map tonight.
That's neat.
And just to see this whole world of people that were, kind of Googling Camino, and then up popped my blog, and then, they would share that with somebody else that might be interested. And just to see the impact of my words and I'm not going to say if it was my ability or maybe it was my attempt to communicate somewhat the experience of what I was having along the Camino. And I'm big on the picture piece of that. Part of that goes back to, when I was doing photography, I think. But I think the visual component of that was important in that messaging to people back home and elsewhere that weren't on the Camino. And being able to show different things, I think that was much more impactful to people than just reading the written word of what that would be. Where they're reading the word about what we did and then seeing what the weather was like, or what this little village was like, or this funny little story that we're having at dinner sitting around. That was something that I could share in a better way.
How did it affect you spiritually? If at all.
That's, really, let's look at the 3 buckets again. Because religiously, I think I have a newfound appreciation for organized religion in a better, I was brought up, Christian, always been connected to the church in one form, whether or not I went to church as much as I should. We went to Catholic churches there because that's what the religion in Spain is, and it's in Spanish. But can you still find value out of a church service in a foreign country, in a different denomination, a different language? And my response is yes. And what I did learn from that, from a religious/spiritual way, was I can go into any type of a setting, whether it's an organized temple, mosque, church, whichever. It could be it could be an auditorium where a live performance is going on. And can I have some connection with that in a spiritual, religious way? And the answer is yes. And I think that's just the piece of that. that I don't need to say, I'm a Protestant, I have to go to a Protestant church, because, well, in Christianity, we all read the same Bible, we believe in the same God, and we may belong in a different club underneath that, but
Right.
it's somewhat the same.
And it's interesting, though, right, that and you're not the first guest that we've talked about this, is that the physical presence of the denomination or the religion itself, people get really caught up in that, versus next what we're going to talk about is the spiritual part of it, and that's your relationship with God, the universe, whatever you want that.
Yeah.
So I guess that's my next question, is how did it affect or change the way your spiritual being is?
Again, am I a better person today than I was pre-Camino? And I would say absolutely. And do you live in harmony with the world, in the spirit world? Are you open to vibrations? Are you open to different thoughts that are coming in that before there was a filter there? It's non-filtered today. So can you read the symbolism in something you're seeing in a live performance? Can you feel differently when you're going to a church service and there's certain words that are being said in a certain context that connect in a different way? So yeah, it just opens up the whole, it's the Camino is like you go in there where there's a dam, and all those thoughts and feelings and experiences are dammed up. And we as humans, probably a large majority of us, go where it is all dammed up. And then as you go along the Camino, that starts to open up and become more porous, and you're open to feelings and suggestions from the universe and just feeling things in a different way. Yeah. And that's probably more spiritual than it is religious, but they are combined in a certain way.
Right. Wow. So you're a changed person because of this?
I think, and I don't think I was a bad person before.
Right.
But boy,
it's transformed you in some ways.
Is life, the way I view life, the relationships with my children, I think, is very different. The relationships with the people I work with, the relationships with my friends is different, because I communicate in a different level. And it's a shame that I had to walk 600 miles to go through this spiritual awakening to be a better listener and I would say a better person all the way around. But yeah, it is transformational. If everybody could just do the Camino.
Right.
But they can't.
Right.
So the pilgrims like me that have done the Camino, that go out and have an opportunity in a platform like American Real to be able to communicate this to the world and say, this was an incredible experience. If you can do this, do whatever you possibly can to take the time off to jockey your schedule, even if you can't do it all at once and you have to go back there 3 or 4 times. It's unbelievable. But think of the world if everybody could embrace just a few of those little components of what the Camino is all about.
Wow, well said. Scott, looking back, if you could go back now, after you've been through the Camino, and go back and talk to the 18-year-old Scott Freeman who was taking photographs of Frank Sinatra, what advice would you give him?
Oh boy, that's pretty deep. Oh boy. The advice to the 18-year-old kid would be follow your dreams and don't ever limit yourself by what you don't think is possible, because anything is possible. And I think that's, sometimes society limits the ability of, you've got a dream. And, in New York State, in the United States, we have something called the New York State Lottery. And one of their monikers or their advertising campaign is $1 in a dream. You put $1 in, you can win, and you can live your wildest dream come true. But they do that in a different sort of way. But I would say that don't stop dreaming. And you think of the musicians or the inventors or performers and these people that had a dream and had a particular talent. And if they didn't really search out and believe in themselves and believe in those dreams, think of the things that in our lifetime would never have happened. Yeah. And we hear all those stories, from people that, well, let's hear an interview from an astronaut. or an author or a musician or a painter or a molecular biologist that came up with this thing because they were the science geek in high school.
Yeah.
So I think that's the beauty of that, of just following your dreams.
Any regrets?
The only regret I have, I wish I had more than 30 days to do it. It was a pretty fast, some people take, the average person probably takes about 45 to 50 days to do it. Some people 2 months, and then, retired people, or if you've got 2 months,
Sure.
much more
your time.
leisurely, because I was on a pretty aggressive pace. And in each one of these little cities, there's history there. Spain has amazing history. And, I had this little handkerchief here that I brought, and this is from Pamplona. And you've all heard of running with the bulls. And we only spent one night. We walked through Pamplona in one night there, but every July they have the running of the bulls that go there, and you put on a pair of jeans, a white shirt, and that's the scarf that you wear. And there's a lot of history and some beautiful museums in Pamplona I didn't get to see. In a lot of these different, the history of 1,000 years of culture, we didn't get to see a lot of that. It was walking through. So.
Just spending more time if you could.
Yeah, if I could do it over again, I would have done whatever I possibly could to add a little bit more time so I could have a little bit more freedom to embrace the culture of Spain, where I don't think I had the opportunity to embrace the culture of Spain. I embraced their vino tinto,
Right.
their red wine you can buy for $1 a bottle or so.
Sure.
And every little town has
It's probably really
vineyard,
good.
and it's really good. So in the food. In some of the music and that, but there's so much more rich culture that Spain has that I would have loved to embrace. But you never know. People do go back and do it again too. So
That's always an option.
yeah, or I could do a different Camino, not the same exact one. So that's always a possibility.
So if people are thinking about this, or they're hearing about it for the first time and they're interested, what advice do you have?
Do your homework. The beauty with social media and the access we have to information is incredible. There is a host of information in there, and blogs and websites all around, preparing for the Camino, what to expect. There's message boards and social media groups that you can interact with and ask a lot of questions, but you really want to do your homework ahead of time so you're well prepared to know what it is, to really know what it is. And if you spend some 4 to 6 months ahead of time getting a sense of the typography, the time of year, the amount of the crowds, how much clothing you need, what's a typical day like, in the planning, and then there's the physical preparedness of it. That there's nothing you can do to train for it other than you've got to be in good shape. So it could be at the gym and cross training, riding a bike, whichever, and where you are in the beginning versus where you are at the end, you do get stronger. Your legs get stronger, your calluses get stronger, all of that. But I think really doing the homework on the front end of that would make the experience so much more enjoyable.
Sure. And there's several different trails, correct?
There is. I think that last night there might be 12 different ways to get from different points around Europe, but you all end up in the Compostela de Santiago, where this cathedral is.
Okay.
But the most popular one is the Camino Francés, and that's the one that I walked on.
Okay. Just a few more questions, but before we do that, I just want to do a little rapid fire. So I'm going to throw out a couple of terms, and if you wouldn't mind just giving some comments back. Happiness.
Happiness is not that difficult to come by.
Material.
If you don't need it, get rid of it.
St. James.
The true path to happiness.
Jesus.
Does exist.
Awesome. Scott, this has been wonderful. I thank you for this. People are really going to enjoy this episode. I've enjoyed it. I've learned a lot. I can't wait to do it. This is something now on my bucket list. And I appreciate you sharing all this insight with us today. But before I let you go, we have one last question that I always ask, and I can't let you go out of here without it. And that is, going through this, you've accomplished a lot in your life. You've done so many great things. You're 60 years old on Monday. What do you want your legacy to be?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. You know, you could think of what is your legacy going to be, or what are they going to put on your tombstone?
Right.
I really don't. So if this is consistent with my message the entire time, I don't want a big tombstone.
Right.
So if I don't want a big tombstone, what is the essence of what I lived, and what did I believe, and what did I stand for? And I think what I've always stand for is integrity and honesty and being a good guy. And I think is doing the Camino, I think it's made me a better person, a better human being, in better in terms of appreciation for different points of view, different cultures. People look different. Skin colors are different. Houses of worship are different, and being able to open and appreciate that. And I think just being a beacon of openness, of, you know, the freedom to express yourself and just exude happiness. I think that's, you know, if that's what I was remembered by, is just being a happy guy that lived his dreams and just enjoyed life to the fullest. How much better does it get than that?
That's great. Yeah, great. Scott Freeman, thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it, and I can't wait to do the Camino.
Thank you, Roger.